Now I'll show you another new feature inside the Select and Mask workspace known as Object Aware that does an even better job of selecting hair. And so assuming that your rectangular marquee tool is selected up here at the top of the toolbox, then you can just go ahead and click on the Select and Mask button up here in the options bar. And a great thing about Select and Mask is that you can apply it over and over again without harming the image, because after all, you're outputting your modifications to the layer mask. And so I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here so that we can see that in addition to this obvious haloing inside the guy's beard, we have a little bit of color fringing over here on the right and left sides of the guy's head. And so notice this refine mode option, which is new, by the way, to Photoshop 2021. When it's expanded, as it is now, we have two buttons, which are currently called Color Aware and Object Aware. I say that because the names of these buttons have changed several times over the development of this version of the software. And so regardless of the names, this first button causes the Select and Mask workspace to behave the way it did in previous versions of the software, whereas this right-hand button does a better job of selecting individual strands of hair. And so notice if I click on this button, then I'm going to get an alert message telling me that changing the refine mode may adjust my edges. At which point I'll go ahead and click OK. Now in my case, it's not making any immediate difference. So what I'm going to do here is zoom on in so that we can see this very subtle color fringing. And now I'll just go ahead and once again click on the refine hair button. At which point you can see that we end up with better edges. And so just for the sake of comparison, this is before, so it's a pretty subtle difference, and this is after. And we can see things a little better over here on the left-hand side of the guy's head. And so once again, this is before. You can see that we have some pretty obvious fringing when we're zoomed this far in. And this is after, thanks to the new Object Aware function here inside the Select and Mask workspace. And I want you to know that in the early days of the development, this button was known as Content Aware. And I only mention that because it relies on content-aware technology. At which point, I'll go ahead and click OK in order to update that layer mask. Now, we do indeed have better hair details, at least around the guy's head, but we still have a massive amount of fringing going on in his beard. And we're going to address that, just as you might expect, in the very next movie. Now I'll show you yet another new feature available to us in the Select and Mask workspace, and that is called real-time refinement, which works hand in hand with the Refine Edge brush tool. And in case you're wondering what I'm talking about, go up to the options bar and click on the Select and Mask button, or if you're not seeing that button, go to the Select menu and choose Select and Mask. Either way, I'm going to go ahead and scroll to the top of the Properties panel and notice this checkbox right here, Real-Time Refinement. In my case, it's dimmed, and that's because my refine mode is currently set to Object Aware. Notice if you set it to Color Aware instead, at which point Photoshop may warn you that you're going to get new edges. In my case, it doesn't make any difference at all, except it now makes the Real-Time Refinement checkbox available. I'm going to go ahead and turn that checkbox off for now, and then I'll make sure that my Refine Edge brush tool is selected over here in the top left corner of the screen. In which case, notice this guy's beard is in pretty tragic condition. To make it better, all I need to do is brush along it. Now notice as I brush, I'm seeing my brush stroke until I release, at which point Photoshop goes ahead and refines that beard. And as you can see, we have a much better result. This is before and this is after. Now, if you'd prefer to see that refinement applied in real time, then all you need to do is scroll over here to the left side of the guy's face and then turn that checkbox, once again, real-time refinement on. And now notice as I brush along the guy's beard, I see that refinement applied in real time. Now things do shift a little bit right there at the end. And so I'll just go ahead and undo that brush stroke and I'll repaint it like so. And notice that I am seeing a preview of the refinement, but as soon as I release, things get even better. All right, now I want you to be aware of one other behavior that may change here inside Photoshop 2021. Notice if I switch the refine mode back to object aware, which is going to do a better job of painting in those hairs, I'll go ahead and click OK in order to dismiss that alert message. And now notice if I paint along the beard again, rather than previewing that refinement, I'm just seeing the brush stroke. In which case, if you're seeing the same thing, then just go ahead and release your mouse button in order to see the newly refined hairs. And now I'm going to paint over this region on the right and left side of the guy's head. And I may paint a little bit along his ear as well, and then down here along the left and right hand sides of his neck. And assuming I like what I see, I'll go ahead and click OK in order to apply those changes. And that's how you work with the new real-time refinement checkbox when the refine mode is set to color aware in the Select and Mask workspace. According to the Photoshop team, a lot of folks have been asking if there's any way to save their favorite select and mask settings as a preset. If you're one of those folks, glad tidings, because now there is. And to demonstrate what I mean, I'll click on the Select and Mask button up here in the options bar, and then here inside the Select and Mask workspace, I'll twirl open the edge detection option, and I'll crank this radius value up to, let's say, 20 pixels is a pretty common setting. And what that does is it paints a brushstroke 20 pixels thick of refinement around the entire layer mask. And to see what that looks like, I'll go ahead and turn on the Show Edge button. And you can see that we have this brushstroke of refinement once again that is uniformly 20 pixels thick. Actually, it's not really thick enough for this guy, so I'll go ahead and crank this value up to 40 pixels, let's say. Now, while a big refinement radius is great for loose hairs, it's not so great for smooth details such as the neck and shirt, which is why you generally also want to turn on the Smart Radius checkbox, and that's going to allow Photoshop to automatically reduce the radius where it can. And now let's say you want those to be your default settings from now on. Then just go ahead and turn on this checkbox, Remember Settings. So it's easy to use, but it's easy to miss as well. At which point I'll click OK in order to apply that change. And now notice if I once again click on the Select and Mask button in order to revisit that Select and Mask workspace, then I'm seeing an edge detection radius of 40 pixels and Smart Radius is turned on. If you want to abandon those settings, just turn off that checkbox. And then if I were to click OK, the next time I visit the workspace, I'll see a radius value of 0 and Smart Radius will be turned off. Now let's say that you have a bunch of different settings that you want to remember. In that case, go ahead and save your settings as a preset by choosing this Save Preset option. And I'll go ahead and paste in a name, Edge Detect 40 pixels, Smart Radius on, and then I'll click the Save button. And notice that I now have this preset that I can choose anytime I like. Now, to save the preset, all you have to do is cancel. But if I were to click cancel now, the next time I visit this workspace, Remember Settings will be turned on once again. If I want it to be turned off, I need to click OK. And that is how you remember some favorite settings, as well as how to save many different settings as presets here inside Photoshop 2021. All right, now I cannot in good conscience leave this composition in this condition, which is why in this movie, I'm going to show you how I achieved this effect here, where this guy appears to be coming out of the clouds. This has nothing to do with the new features inside Photoshop 2021. If you're all about the new features, skip to the next chapter. All right, this is just a demo, so it's going to be quick. I'm going to start off by cleaning up these edges by creating a new layer, which you can do by pressing Control-Shift-N or Command-Shift-N on the Mac. I'll call this layer Edges. I'll turn on Use Previous Layer to create clipping mask, and I'll change the mode to Multiply, so we're darkening up the edges. I'll click OK. All right, now I'll switch to the brush tool, which you can get by pressing the B key. And I want a big brush, so I'll right click inside the image and I'll take the size value up to 200 pixels. I want a hardness value of 0%, so I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to accept that change. Now I want to lift a shade of purple from the background. And so I'll press and hold the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac to temporarily access the eyedropper, and I'll click right about there in order to lift that shade of purple like so. Now I'll just go ahead and brush around the edges of this guy's hair. You want to take it easy around his ears, by the way, so kind of move your cursor away from the ears if you're trying to work along with me, and just paint around the hair itself, and you'll get this effect here. Now, things are going to look a lot better if he's a little bit purplish. So I'll go ahead and click on the dude layer right there, and then I'll click on the FX icon, and I'll choose Color Overlay. Now, by default, I end up with this gray effect right here, which is nothing like what I want. So I'll click on the color swatch to bring up the color picker dialog box, and I'll once again click on a shade of purple right there. And if you're getting a shade of gray instead, that's because your layer mask is selected. In any event, I'll click OK to accept that change. I'll set the blend mode to hue, so that we're blending the hue values along with his original saturation and luminance levels, and I'll take the opacity value down to 33%, so we end up with just a little bit of purpleization like so. And I'll press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to accept that change. Now I want to mask him into the clouds, and so I'll select both of these layers by clicking on one, shift-clicking on the other, click on the flyout menu icon in the top right corner of the Layers panel and choose New Group from Layers. And I'll go ahead and call this guy More Mask, and then I'll click OK. And the reason I'm calling it More Mask is because I'm going to add some more mask. And so I'll twirl this guy open just so I can see the layers inside the group. And then I'll drop down to the Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the Layers panel and click on it. Now what you want to do is scroll up just a little bit like so, and I'm going to turn off that dude layer right there so that I can see through to the clouds. This still allows me to adjust the mask, by the way. And then I'll press the right bracket key a couple of times in order to increase the size of the brush to 300 pixels, as we're seeing on the far left side of the options bar. I'll tap the D key for the default colors, so the foreground color is white, and then I'll press the X key in order to swap them so the foreground color is black. And now I'll just go ahead and paint along here like so inside these clouds, and then I'll paint up this cloud ridge as well. Now I'm not seeing what I'm doing, however, I am able to see what I'm tracing. And then if I turn that dude layer back on, you can see that he's nicely masked into the clouds. And I can still paint a little more on that shoulder if I want to. All right, now I'll press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to center my zoom. I'll switch back to that dude layer, and I want him to be darker down here at the bottom. So I'll click on the FX icon once again and choose Gradient Overlay. And this time I'll click this down pointing arrowhead right here in order to bring up my basics. And you can see that one of them is going to be foreground to transparent. That's the one I want. So I'll just go ahead and select that guy. If you want to confirm that you have the right effect, you can click on that gradient ramp. Just make sure it goes from purple to purple if you like. You don't need that second purple. We just want a big purple gradient that goes from 100% opacity to 0% opacity, at which point I'll click OK. A style of linear and an angle value of 90 degrees are exactly what I want. However, I'm going to take this scale value down to 50% like so. I'll change the blend mode to multiply once again. And then I'll move my dialog box out of the way so I can drag inside the image window to move the gradient down so that it mostly covers his neck without covering that much of his face. At which point I'll go ahead and click OK in order to accept that change. And now if I press Shift F, I can switch to the full screen mode, at which point I'll go ahead and zoom on in. And just so we can see what we've done, this is the version of the image that we saw at the outset of this movie, and this is how it looks now, thanks to a few old school compositing tricks that I happen to pull off inside Photoshop 2021. In this chapter, we'll take a look at what Adobe is currently at least calling the neural filters. And in case you're wondering what in the world I'm saying, not the Norwal filters, but rather the neural filters. As in AI, if you like. So these filters have nerves, don't you know? And it's actually a collection of automated retouching and special effects filters. Now, I'm not all that confident that Adobe's going to stick with neural filters as the name. We've gone through a lot of renaming during this product cycle. Before this, it was called the Filter Studio. Before that, it was called the AI Filter Gallery. And before that, it was called the Neural Filters Gallery. And I mention this not to embarrass Adobe, although it is fairly hilarious, but rather to just let you know that the name could change once again. And so here we are looking at a photograph from the Dreamstime image library, about which you can learn more and get some great deals at dreamstime.com/geek. And so what I'm going to tell you is, like any filter, the neural filters work on pixel-based images or smart objects. And you're always going to have the most flexibility with the latter. And so I'm going to go ahead and double click on this background item here inside the layers panel, and I'll just call it Dude. Once again, click OK. And then, armed with my rectangular marquee tool, I'll right click inside the image window and choose Convert to Smart Object. And that way we can apply the neural filters as a smart filter. Then you want to go up to the filter menu and choose whatever command is at this location. Hopefully Adobe's going to stick with this name in order to bring up this big workspace. Now, this blue rectangle right here is showing what Photoshop considers to be the face. And so if there were multiple faces inside this photograph, then we would see multiple rectangles. Now notice that we have a couple of different categories of filters. We've got these guys, which are the featured filters, and everything I'm telling you could change in the future. But for now, we've got the featured filters, and then we have a ton of beta filters, some of which aren't even shipping at this point in time. So notice in my case, photo restoration is a filter that's coming in the future, and you can indicate whether you're interested or not. For now, I'm going to stick with the featured filters, starting with skin smoothing. And I want you to notice, after you select this filter, you're going to need to download it by clicking on this little cloud icon. And then, depending on the speed of your internet connection, the filter will pop up on screen. And so you're going to want to do that with every single one of these filters, by the way. Photoshop will tell you how big it is, and you can decide whether you want to download that filter or not. Now, I wouldn't judge this filter by this effect right here, and so I'm going to go ahead and turn it off, as you can see, by clicking on this little toggle icon, and then I'll switch back to skin smoothing, and I'm going to show you how this very useful feature works in the very next movie.